all about the problems. My internet went out as soon as I got home, but it's back now. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about nutrition for feeding the farm dogs, smart nutrition for healthy, hardworking companions. So before we get into everything, it's helpful to kind of recap what AFCO versus NRC is, because I'll kind of refer to this throughout the lecture. So AFCO is Association of American Feed Control Officials. It's a non-governmental organization committee. They kind of set standards of like what minimum requirements are in pet food, what the pet label for food should say, and things like that. In the United States, most laws are made at the state level, but most of them are going to adapt what AFCO guidelines have set. So in the United States, each commercial diet requires an AFCO statement or the nutrition adequacy statement. And that's going to basically say one of three things. It's going to say this diet is intended for intermittent supplemental feeding, or it's going to say it's complete and balanced for adult maintenance, or it's going to say it's complete and balanced for growth or all life stages like gestation, pregnancy, lactation. But that's the same. Growth in all life stages. It's the same pretty much nutrient goals. And then plus or minus if it's for large breed puppies. So we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. So the AFCO statement, when they make these claims, is it complete and balanced or not, it's going to either be based on one of three things. Either the nutrient composition, feeding trials, or similar diets, family products. And that one's a little odd that I'll explain in a minute, but feeding trials. So that is, if it's for adult maintenance, it's got to be greater than 8 healthy dogs in there. It's 26 weeks long, and nobody can show any signs of nutrient deficiency. They can't lose too much weight. I believe they can't lose more than 15% of their body weight. They can't have the average albumin drop below 2.8. ALPs can't raise above 150 and things like that. So it has to meet all those to be able to pass a feeding trial and then get that label for complete and balance. And if it's for growth, the feeding trial is again greater than 8 healthy puppies of at least 8 weeks of age. They have to be from 3 different litters though, and it's only 10 weeks long instead of 26 weeks long, but otherwise same guidelines of can't lose weight and etc. Sometimes the reason why they might do feeding trials versus nutrient composition is because AFCO sets minimum requirements for growth. Like let's say protein, minimum for AFCO protein for a growing dog, I believe is 6.5 grams of protein per 100 kcals. But there's some diets out there for like liver disease where puppies might have shunts and they have signs of hepatic encephalopathy where we know we need to restrict their protein. So like no diet is ever going to be labeled for growth by nutrient composition and be able to be fed to a puppy with hepatic encephalopathy. So they'll do feeding trials, and if they pass, it can get that claim. And that example is Hill's LD diet. It does have a feeding trial claim for growth. But if you look at the actual nutrient composition of that diet, it does not meet growth requirements. And then the whole similar diets, family products, you don't really see that very often, but it's basically where there's a lot of companies out there that have recipes where they're all very similar recipes or just like slightly different. And if one of those diets met AFCO guidelines, the parent family product can also claim that it's complete and balanced based on that one that did meet everything. And this is just an example. If you flip open AFCO, you'll see what like growth and reproduction minimum are versus adult maintenance minimum. And it has it for all your major macro and micronutrients. And even for protein, it's broken down to like the amino acid requirements. And here's some examples of those nutrition statements that you'll see. This one is formulated to meet nutritional levels. So they looked at all those different ingredients and made sure it met the minimum that's published in that chart I just showed you. This one says intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding. And there's a decent number of prescription diets that will have that claim, especially kidney diets. It doesn't mean that diet can't be fed long term to those dogs. It's just because a lot of times with chronic kidney disease, you're trying to restrict phosphorus and or protein. And sometimes the restriction is more than what can be for minimum healthy dogs, but that's on purpose because that's what we need for that disease process. So even though sometimes things in prescription diets say intermittent or supplemental feeding only, doesn't mean it can't actually be fed long term. And then here's an example of growth. And this one, it says including growth of large sized dogs. So when it's a large breed puppy, it means they're expected to be 70 pounds or more as an adult. And we'll get into that again a little bit more soon. So on the flip side, we have NRC, which is National Research Council. Essentially, when we refer to NRC, we're referring to this wonderful textbook, which honestly, if anyone needs help trying to sleep at night, just flip open this textbook and just start reading something, and it will help you get there because it is dense. It has so much knowledge and wealth of information in there, but it essentially is just reviewing like every peer-reviewed literature that had been done at the time of writing this for each topic. And then thankfully, it summarizes what it all means. And they've kind of set up their own chart of minimum requirements for the various nutrients. And some of it's the same as AFCO, some of it's higher, some of it's lower. NRC also kind of has like minimum requirements, adequate intake, recommended allowance, safe upper limit. It's a lot more detailed. The recommended allowance right here, this column, the amount of in the grams per 1,000 calories, this is kind of similar to what the AFCO is going at, but it also gives us other ways to look at nutrients that I'm not going to bore you with because it's beyond the scope of this lecture, but there are times when we reference NRC over AFCO when we're trying to feed different nutrient requirements for sick animals or overweight animals or something like that. So how do we choose a diet and a healthy dog? You're not here to learn about the chronic kidney disease and things like that. It's the farmer's dog. They're healthy. They're hardworking. How do we pick a diet? There's like thousands. There's quite literally over thousands of options out there. Well, we want the diet to be complete and balanced. So how do we know the diet's complete and balanced? We look for that AFCO or nutrient adequacy statement, or we tell an owner, pick a diet that has the AFCO statement that says it's complete and balanced for whatever life stage that animal is. So I'm sure we all know at least one animal out there that's on an incomplete, balanced, home-cooked table scraps diet, and they seem to be fine. So the complete and balanced, it's a lot more important when it's growth, especially those large breed puppies, which is why it has this extra claim on the nutrition adequacy statement. So that NRC textbook, if you flip it open and you start reading about deficiencies and things for micronutrients, it's the most severe things definitely seem to be when it occurs during growth. Like if there's deficiencies in like iron or manganese, they're going to have impaired growth. If there's deficiencies in vitamin A during growth, they could become deaf or their optic and trigeminal nerves don't develop correctly. And then there's also not even just deficiencies you have to worry about, but excess nutrition. So if those large breed puppies get too much calcium, they're going to have skeletal abnormalities and osteochondrosis. And so there is the difference between just growth of any puppy versus growth of large breed. While they both need more calcium than the adult needs, there's a max set for the calcium in large breed growth diets. And that's not all. Like, yes, you have to feed a diet specifically that's labeled for large breed growth if you have a large breed puppy, but you also need to make sure it's not just being free fed, because even if the calcium is restricting the diet, but that owner is just letting them have at it, go crazy, eat as much as you want, kid, they're still getting more overall, and that can lead to the skeletal abnormalities. So as nutritionists and internists and veterinarians, we want everybody to be on a complete and balanced diet, but it's especially important during growth, especially in a large breed puppy. Next, there's so many brands out there. There's new ones popping up every day. People get passions and they're like, I'm going to start a pet food company, right? Because my cat had this or my dog had that. So now I've got to go make a pet food. So to select the right brand, Wasava has these guidelines of how to tell if a brand is trustworthy or not. Like, do they employ veterinary nutritionists? Like, who's formulating these diets? Do they have a degree that says they actually know what they're doing? Are they having quality control of the ingredients they're bringing and putting in the food? Where is it being put together? Things like that. There's a whole list. Sometimes, if you're busy, you can just, if an owner's got a lot of questions, you can print this pamphlet out and be like, here's the Lasava guidelines of how to tell if that pet food brand you want to feed is worthwhile. I think at the end of the day, for me, if I'm evaluating a new brand online or trying to see what an owner's feeding, if I trust it, I kind of look mainly for, do they employ vet nutritionists? Like, is it easy to tell who's making these diets? Is it easy to find their nutrition facts? What's required by AFCO on all these pet food labels is called guaranteed analysis numbers, which means it's a minimum protein, a minimum fat, and a max fiber. But those are minimums and max. The actual as fed typical analysis values of those nutrients are, they're different. They're not those numbers. They're actually sometimes quite different. So I prefer to know what's actually in the food as fed typical analysis. So if I can find that on their website, I'm much more trustworthy of this brand because they're telling me exactly what's in the food. And then also just make sure they don't like spread misinformation on their website. I don't trust them if they're spreading false information to people. And before you kind of like get into like, here's the diet you should feed this pet, this farm dog, you need to kind of evaluate their body condition score. And there's several resources for this. This one's the Royal Canin one. Ideal is a 4 or 5 on a 9-point scale. There's multiple studies that have shown if you keep a working dog, especially more on the lean side, like a 4 out of 9 versus a 5 out of 9, you can improve their endurance and they'll live longer. They'll also be less, they'll have a longer period of time before you have to start treating for osteoarthritis as well. So the farmer's dog, that hardworking dog, we should try to aim for more of the lean ideal body weight. So then, calculating resting energy requirements. That's what the animal needs just to circulate their blood, breathe, all the basic cellular mechanisms. That's not like getting up and doing anything. That's just like resting in a box, not moving, resting energy requirements. And this is the equation. You take their body weight in kgs, you put it to the 0.75 power, and you times it by 70. And that is the estimated resting energy requirements of that dog. Now you need to add an MER factor. You have to times this amount by an MER factor. And this is going to cover the physical activity they're doing, if they're growing or not. Even stress, anxiety, and excitement can increase their energy needs. If their heart beats really fast because they're super excited to go do their job outside, like that takes more energy to make that heart beat faster. Also, if they are living outside and they're not always in a thermal neutral environment, and maybe sometimes it's really cold or it's really hot, it takes energies on both end of the spectrum to kind of keep the main body temperature in the nice range. So it takes energy to get rid of heat when they're hot, and it takes energy to get themselves warmer when they're cold. And all that kind of factors into what their maintenance energy requirement is. This is like a rough guideline chart when you have no information to go off and you're just, an owner's like, how much am I supposed to feed this animal? So if they're a neutered adult, just kind of normal activity level, like a 1.6 times that RAR. If they're a puppy, it's 3 times RAR, especially if there's less than 4 months old. If they're a working dog, there's a big range there because it kind of depends on like what kind of work are they doing, how long are they working, how many days a week. So there's a big range for the working dog on what the MER factor is. In reality, the best estimate of what MER is you take that dog that's at an ideal weight, and that owner can tell you exactly what they're feeding and how much, and you calculate how many calories they're eating. That is their MER because they are eating that amount and they're at ideal body weight. So let's go through a quick example because if you actually have the time to sit there and make a judgment of what an animal's RAR and MER should be, and then you actually look at what their weight, body condition, and how much they're eating, sometimes there's a big discrepancy and it can actually kind of clue you into some things. So here's an example. Say we have a 4-year-old female spayed Labrador. She weighs 24 kgs, and you assess her body condition score to be 3 out of 9. So she's a bit underweight. And you get that diet history and you calculate how much they're feeding, and it's 2,600 calories a day. So when you calculate RER, you should calculate based off of ideal body weight because that's what the lean mass should be. So let's say we want, this is a working dog. Let's say 4 out of 9 is our ideal. Now, everybody has a little bit different way of doing this. And I do train between Ohio State and internal medicine for my nutrition residency. And they do it a little bit different. But I started Ohio State. I like how they do it. I think it's more simple. So I'm going to tell you that way. But it's not an end all be all. There are multiple ways to do this. So we like to say for each body condition score point that's away from ideal, that's about 10% of body weight. Okay, so if she's 3 out of 9 and we want her to be a 4 out of 9 and a lean ideal body weight, that means she should gain 10% weight to be ideal. So that would be 26.4 kgs. We plug that into the calculation and we get an RER of 815 calories per day. She's working, let's say she's not working that much, and we're going to just do a 2 factor. That's going to be about 1,630 calories estimated to eat a day. So right now she's actually eating a 3.2 times RAR when you take how many calories. But then you go back to the owner and they're like, oh, her job, she just chased the grandkids around 1 day a week. Okay, well, that's not that many calories. So that means she's not really expending that much energy. She's underweight. She's eating a ton. Like something's not adding up here. So then the most common thing I start to think about is, does this animal have underlying GI disease? Are they not absorbing all the nutrition they're eating? If they're really young, like less than a year, then you start to wonder, like, do they have GI parasites? Should I do a fecal screening? Should I deworm? That kind of thing. So regardless, the dog's underweight. We need to get more calories into that animal, plus or minus investigate if there's underlying GI disease. So some tips for trying to increase calories in an animal. Sometimes their stomach capacity is actually the limiting factor. Like people can't physically get them to fit more food into them. So then you would like to choose a diet that's more calorically dense. And dry food is more calorically dense than wet food. So sometimes switching, if they were on fresh frozen or canned food, things like that, you could switch them to dry food, and then each bite counts a little bit more in terms of calories. Feed them more frequently. If they can't fit everything in one meal in a day, then maybe do twice a day or 3 times a day. Sometimes even just like choosing a diet with more nutrient bioavailability helps. Like, what does that mean? So fiber is a classic example. Fiber isn't for the animal, it's for the animal's gut microbiome. The animal is not getting any energy from the fiber. The microbiome is metabolizing that and making little products that are beneficial to the animal, but there's no energy being obtained from that. So if you're feeding a high fiber diet, inherently there's less energy density to that food. Like say the other dog in the house is obese and that got put on like an overweight diet. Those tend to be very high in fiber. And then this dog that has GI disease, poor absorption is just, it's easy if they both eat the same food in the house. But now we're not able to get enough calories in that dog because it's eating too low calorie of a diet. And that diet is also less bioavailability of the nutrients. So sometimes switching to like a highly digestible diet can also help in those scenarios. So let's get more into like the actual composition of the diet for especially a hardworking dog on the farm. So macronutrients, your protein, your fat, your carbohydrates, that's where all the energy and calories are coming from. So sorry, my computer decided to turn on. Okay, so it depends on what their activity is, how often they're doing that activity can kind of change how you want the proportion of protein to fat to carbohydrates to be. So based on the NRC, where it summarized all the different studies that they've done in like sled dogs and racing greyhounds and things like that, if dogs are exercising more than 30 minutes a day, they need higher protein in their diet. Because at rest, dogs are getting their energy equally from carbohydrate metabolism and fat metabolism. But once they are exercising more than 30 minutes, they've kind of used up their glycogen and glucose storage, and they need to start making some new glucose. And they need to metabolize and like move all of their muscle into amino acids to start doing gluconeogenesis. So that means we need to give them more protein so they have more amino acid reserves. If they're doing a really short duration of heavy exercise, they need a bit higher carbohydrates because that's more of like anaerobic metabolism. There's not enough time to get oxygen. We got to make what we've got with the glucose and the phosphocreatine bonds and etc. So the classic example of this in the literature is the racing greyhounds. So I don't know how often that's the type of activity dogs are doing. They're more built for endurance activity anyway, even just based on the muscle fibers they have. They're more of the I'm going to work a long time at a steady pace and just like endurance. So if they're working long periods of time, multiple days, they actually benefit from more fat in the diet because they're doing most of their energy metabolism from fat oxidation. So sometimes, depending on what that dog's activity and how often it's working, kind of changes exactly what you want in the diet. At the end of the day, um, training that dog is going to make them the best at their job. Diet is never going to trump what training or lack of training is done, but diet can improve stamina and things like that. For the micronutrients, like your vitamins, your minerals, antioxidants, or even creatine, they've looked at that and it doesn't seem like they need any different requirements than what AFCO and NRC has already stated for healthy dogs. And you know what? Maybe that's because when they're working hard, their MER factor goes up. So they're eating more calories. So overall, they are consuming more minerals and vitamins and antioxidants and things like that in the diet than an animal that's eating less because it's not expending as much energy. Other little things about working dogs, they're not very efficient in converting muscle energy. So if they're having to do a lot of uphill or downhill work, it requires even more energy. If they're carrying loads, that's going to increase their energy expenditure, and it's actually proportionate. So if they're carrying a load that increases their total body mass by 10%, then they need 10% increase in calories, at least in that moment. And then if they're like pulling that load up and down a hill and there's like the traction and that they're having to overcome, then they need even more energy. That's honestly all theoretical. I don't know if you're going to be able to sit there and be like, okay, exactly how many miles and what's the degree of the hill that they're going up or down. Like nobody's going to do that, but just fun little information. And I mentioned this other energy expenditures, if they're getting really excited before they get to do their job or their work or whatever exercise they may be doing, that's going to increase their energy. And then if it's really hot outside, they're going to have to, all they can do is pant. They don't have sweat glands besides their paw pads. So it takes a lot of work for them to pant and dissipate heat. And that also means they'll lose some water. And we'll kind of get into water and hydration requirements in a little bit. So I said we might want higher protein, higher fat, in select cases, maybe a bit more carbohydrates in their diet. So what does that even mean, high versus low? This is a bit of a guideline. So for protein, high protein for dogs is going to be a diet that's greater than 8 grams per 100 kcal. That would be considered a high protein diet. For fat, if we wanted like moderate to high fat, we're looking at 3 to 5 plus grams of fat per 100 kcals. And these units per the grams per 100 kcals, that's how most of us like to look at diets so that they're directly comparable to each other. The percentages you get on food bags are not directly comparable to each other because they have different moistures and things like that. So you have to convert it to a unit to be able to compare diets. And most nutritionists are going to use an as fed like grams per 100 kcals type deal. So diets that are high protein and high fat. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few. These are some wet options just to show an example. And these are over the counter diets. So it's not like they need to bother you for you to sign a script or anything. They can purchase this on their own. You can see the protein here. All of these are greatly above 8 grams per 100 kcal. And the fat here varies. This is like moderate fat diet. Here's a really high fat diet. Maybe if this animal was like doing like 5 hours of work every single day, maybe we'd prefer this one. The carbohydrate levels right here, this one's a little bit higher in carbohydrates compared to the other. Maybe this would be for the dog that's sprinting really fast, herding animals for 30 plus minutes every single day. That might be a better suit diet for them. Here's some dry food options, and there's a mix. There's freeze-dried, air fried, right? Here's an air fried, kibble, dehydrated. There's so many different forms of diets out there now where owners and pets can actually be pretty picky about the texture they like in the food, but there's lots of options. And really, some of them are really high protein, 19 grams of protein per 100 calories. Fat here, this one's getting a little almost close to being low fat. Basically no carbohydrates. So there's a big range, and it's just you can kind of pick and choose based on like what that animal's activity level is and what the owners want, what the dog wants to eat, what the owners want to purchase to feed, etc. Some other feeding tips for the working animal: you don't want to feed them immediately before intense activity, especially if it's a high fat meal. Um, there are studies that show that intestinal function will change when they're doing exercise and intense work. So you don't want something in there messing with things or slowing gastric emptying and potentially like causing them to reflux or vomit. It's best to feed them after intense exercise. So hydration needs. We all know dogs need lots of water and they should have access to water all the time. Athletic working dogs, I've never had this, but just in case an owner ever is like, well, I'm going to give him Gatorade because he needs extra electrolytes, like it's hot outside. That's actually very false. So it actually will not help them at all because they can't sweat besides their paw pads. They're not losing sodium. They're only losing water when they're getting dehydrated and working. And so their blood is hyperosmolar. And the only way to fix that is just pure water. In fact, if you give animals water versus saline versus mannitol versus milk, the dogs that aren't drinking water will just keep drinking and drinking and drinking because they can't replace the water and they're still dehydrated. And what actually ends up happening is now they got all these extra electrolytes that they don't need and they need to flush out their kidneys, and then water follows and they can actually just dehydrate themselves more if they're getting electrolytes with their water when they're dehydrated. Adequate hydration is needed to prevent dehydration, duh, no brainer, and also to prevent hyperthermia. So dogs, it's very interesting. When they get dehydrated, they can purposely raise their body heat so that the difference between their body heat and the environment is even greater, so that more air, like heat could dissipate without them having to like lose water from the panting. So it's a nice little mechanism they have, but if they're becoming dehydrated because they're working hard in the hot environment, their temperature is already going to be raising. So they can get pretty sketchy there if they don't have access to water, if they're working hard, especially in heat. And real fun fact, I need to find the numbers, but dogs, that they can do anything being fasted. That it doesn't actually affect their endurance like it would a person. The only thing that really affects their endurance is being well hydrated. And there was a study where they had this dog that was fasted for 4 days, and it was able to run 140 miles over 39 hours without stopping. So that's insane. That dog obviously had free access to water, but being fasted or not fed does not make a difference in their endurance. So that's kind of like the hardworking farm dog nutrition aspect. And now I was going to take the rest of the time to kind of go over some other nutritional aspects that I'm sure we've all seen. There's been a big push to fresh food or minimally processed food. A lot of the advertisement is like, this is healthier and better for dogs than that highly processed kibble and things like that. And I'm the highly processed term I've got beef with. Like you say highly processed, we're all like, ew, that's bad. Well, highly processed people food like Dorito chips and Chex Mix, like, yeah, that's highly processed. It pretty much is just energy. There's not really like nutrient energy, like anything coming from that. But highly processed dog food is complete and balanced nutrition. That's very different than a bag of Doritos for people. So just saying it's highly processed and bad is just like there's a disconnect there, and it's just putting bad thoughts in people's minds that aren't necessarily true, because we have plenty of studies using kibble and canned like prescription diets for various disease processes that have shown improvement in quality of life and prolonging life because it is complete and balanced nutrition. But they're saying it's highly processed because high temperatures are needed to create canned and kibble diets. And while there's a lot of different aspects that can argue for that, the biggest thing that people are talking about are AGEs, which is advanced glycogen end products. And basically, that's anytime glucose is kind of connecting with amino acids or DNA or something else, and it's like changing into a product and it creates an AGE. So there's lots of different AGEs. Every time we're taking a breath and just our cells are just metabolizing, we're all making AGEs, animals, people, plants. Everybody is making AGEs at all times. And if you are cooking food that already inherently has AGEs and you're applying temperature, it does make some more, and it makes different kinds. It's called the Maillard reaction is one example. That's the browning of our food, which most of us relate to. That's what tastes good. That does create AGEs. And in people, it's starting to become very they're very interested in it. They just created a society of researchers to start looking into it more. So human medicine is always ahead of us, veterinary medicine, and they still have a lot to learn and figure out. And we are like just started even kind of looking into this. So it's like, well, what AGEs for dogs are even a problem for health? Okay, so far in veterinary literature, we've started measuring some AGEs in like fresh diets versus canned diets and kibble diets. And most of the studies say, yeah, there's higher AGEs in the kibble and food that had high heat applied to it. But it's like, okay, well, does that matter? Does it make a difference? We don't know yet. And in people, like only about 10% of the AGs in your food is actually going to be absorbed through your gut and into your blood. And they've also shown in people, if they do eat a lot of highly processed AGE filled food, the microbiome will shift and the bacteria that's in there will actually just use up more AGE. So that's kind of like counterbalancing it. So there's so much that needs done yet. And just saying highly processed food is bad is just a marketing tactic. And as far as all the nutritionists I know that are, no diet form is inherently superior to the other. The best diet depends on the patient, what their nutritional goals are, what they're willing to eat, and then also what the owner is willing to feed. Because if you recommend the perfect diet and they're just going to roll their eyes behind your back and never feed that to the animal, then it's not the perfect diet. When it comes to raw food, we all know like there's risk with raw food with like salmonella and things like that. I'd say most animals seem to be fine. So then the concern is really like they're like carriers into their intestines, and people that are preparing it are contaminating their kitchen and utensils. And then wherever the dog is defecating, they're potentially contaminating the environment. And then there's the risk for the immunocompromised. But freeze dried food is becoming popular. There's lots of options out there. Sorry, my picture is cutting off the words, but it's technically a raw food because no heat is used in processing. But as long as it's from a reputable brand, it is safe because while they're not using heat as their lethality step to treat for pathogens, they're using something called high pressure pasteurization. It's a non-thermal lethality step, and it can be just as effective. But it needs to be a good company that's doing this, because technically the settings and how the high pressure pasteurization is performed needs to be validated for each recipe. And also, you need a good company that's like testing the starting ingredients and making sure they're not going in with a beginning high microbial load, because then there's going to probably be a higher end microbial load. So freeze dried food, in my opinion, and most nutritionists that I've talked to, are okay as long as it's coming from a reputable brand that puts in the work. But most of the companies, every company I've reached out to so far from a freeze dried product I've asked, is using high pressure pasteurization. And then in treats, everybody loves to give treats to their pets, especially the farm dog, I'm sure. We always say we want treats to be less than 10% of their daily calories. That just avoids unbalancing their overall diet. I'm sure like dental disease might be something that you're commonly asked about. I just recommend that if they're going to feed a dental treat or a dental product, it needs this VOHC seal. So it's actually been proven to do what it says it does, which is reduce tartar and/or plaque. Dental treats do tend to be very high in calories. There's definitely some out there where I'm like, this would never fit in any dog's treat allowance. So if it's like a case where it really matters, like they're overweight, then there's a lot of options on that VOHC list that you can get online that have 0 calories, like water additives, toothpaste, even powder you can add to the food. And then for the small breed farmer dogs out there, always recommend no like osseous bone type treats, because there's case reports that show that they are increased risk for pharyngeal foreign bodies with those types of treats. And then supplements, there's so many supplements everywhere you look. People love to buy supplements. They think it's going to make everything better. Well, the one that has the most evidence of having benefit is going to be your EPA, DHA, omega-3 fatty acids. There's so much literature that's looked at its use for skin, GI, arthritis, kidney, heart disease. Um, but it depends on what product you use, because there's a lot of like fish oil capsules out there that are like 1,000 milligrams omega-3s, but then you like turn the bottle over and you read it and it's like half of those omega-3s is ALA, but ALA is not what we want. That's not doing the anti-inflammatory things. Is EPA, DHA. So like really paying attention to what product they're using matters. There's guidelines. There's a 2011 report that kind of gives guidelines on what dose for anti-inflammatory versus arthritis, and that dose is how many milligrams of EPA DHA you want total in a day. And so you got to make sure it's like actually EPA DHA, not just omega-3s or just fish oil, because some of those products have other fatty acids in there that aren't doing what we want. For reference, the RAR equation I gave earlier, the body weight in kgs to the 0.75 power times 70, it's very similar to that, the equation for fish for EPA DHA, only instead of 70 is times 125 for the anti-inflammatory. And for arthritis is times 310. So that's like a really high dose. I rarely get patients that go that high. Most of the time the owners are like, my dog smells like fish. I can't stand to be around them. But that is the dose for those two things. And then because arthritis is probably one of the most common complaints and things that you're treating, there was a 2023 review paper that looked at what else besides like EPA DHA actually has evidence of improving comfort with arthritis. And there was like 3 ingredients that came up: type 2 collagen, eggshell membranes, and hyaluronic acid. Now, I don't have any single supplement out there that I'm aware of that has just these 3 ingredients. Most of them have a bunch of different things going on. So I just kind of give my clients this list and I'm like, well, just choose a supplement that at least has one of these. And then I was just gonna wrap up with probably some of the most like sick illness complaints you might get from the fibrous dog and what diets might work for that. So large breed diarrhea or colitis, the ones where they're like having a bowel movement 5 times a day, small, frequent bouts of it. Sometimes there's frank blood in it, mucus. Our number one go-to is gonna be a fiber-enriched diet. So here's some prescription diets that you might be very familiar with. They have a nice total dietary fiber. It's usually a soluble fiber component, but like GI Biome, Purina EN Fiber Balance, Royal Canin High Fiber. Those are all great diets, but say you don't really want to write a script or owner's not really interested in the pricing of prescription diets. Here's some over-the-counter diets. Now, over-the-counter diets don't always give a total dietary fiber content. They're just giving a crude fiber, so you kind of make a little bit more guesses. But here's some decent ones that could be tried as well for a large bowel diarrhea or colitis case in the farmer's dog. And then the other one they might commonly get is like vomiting or small bowel diarrhea, where they're only having 2 bowel movements a day, but it's large volumes of diarrhea or they're vomiting. And so usually our first direction with that is recommending a highly digestible and or hydrolyzed diet. There's obviously lots of prescription diets that meet those goals. But some of the over-counter diets that might help are like Just Food for Dogs, Fresh Sensitive Stomach. That's going to be like a homemade style food. Square Pet, VFS, Skin and Digestive Support. And then there's some other things. This one I think is a nice little gem. Fresh Pet Homestyle Creations Grilled Chicken Bites. It looks like a treat, but it's actually complete and balanced. And it comes up frequently on my list when I'm like looking for things that work nice for certain cases. And it could potentially work for a vomiting small bowel diarrhea case. So that is my presentation. All the list you saw today of diets was made using Vets Bowl, which is something I helped found. You can get a 30-day free trial. It does cost money, but there are other resources that if you needed help selecting diets for clients, there's other free resources like MMI, which is Mark Morehouse Institute, and vetnutritionist.ai, which was created by a veterinary nutritionist, and that has a wide range of diets on there. And MMI mostly just has like your Purina and Hills and Royal Canin on there. But there's lots of options out there to help figure out what diets Because while you now know that you might want higher protein or higher fat for that working dog, the next question is like, well, what diet actually has that? So there are resources that can help you with that. And if you have any other questions about my presentation, or I didn't cover something that you were really interested in knowing more about, that is my email. I think I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but I am a boarded internist now doing a nutrition residency between Ohio State and University of Tennessee. So that is my background, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or later via email.